Hey, everybody, this is your friend, whether we've met or not. I'd like to think that we're friends, Ryan Singer. Thank you for listening to another experience of me and Paranormal You. We're going to have a great experience today. We have Daniel Noah, who is a creative. I almost called you a creative boiler room, which is a weird thing to pop into my mind. Like, because when I
I
think
love
boiler room,
that. Yeah.
so much action happening, right? Daniel Noah is a writer, a producer, a director, a creator, a lover of the paranormal, an experiencer of the paranormal. Um, uh, Known for movies like Mandy and is it Color Out of Space, right? That's
Mhm.
the H.P. Lovecraft. It's so funny how like these worlds are converging for me right now. A mutual friend of ours, Jim Perry, is the one
Yeah.
who connected us, and I had just recently, a couple right before I left Los Angeles to do this road trip, I had a new roommate move into my apartment, a young kid who had never seen the island of Dr. Moreau. So me and me and
Which
Jim,
version? The
the one that was the
the
Richard Stanley, supposed to be the Richard
yeah
Stanley version.
yeah yeah yeah
So I told him, I was like, you have to see the the craziest movie
yeah.
you've never seen. You have to see it.
Yeah.
And so we're watching the island of Dr. Moreau. And then one of the other roommates, I got like a 4-bedroom townhouse place, right? The other
Mhm.
roommate comes out, he's like, "Oh, that documentary I hear is amazing about the making of the island of Dr. Moreau." And I'm like, "Okay, boom." So we watch the island of Dr. Moreau and then immediately binge right into the documentary about the making, and where Stanley is talking about his
Yeah.
perspective, really, and about how that whole process unfolded. And it's like, it's so crazy to me that Marlon Brando is involved in two of the craziest movies of all time, as far as like having a documentary made about how bonkers it was to make these
It's
movies.
true. Yeah.
Yeah, so and so then that led us to the Richard Stanley movie,
Mhm.
starring Nick Cage, that we just mentioned, because it's like, oh, this is his first feature film.
20 years, 20 plus years, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
so and that happens to be one of your projects, uh, and so it's very cool how all this is coming together.
I love it. I love it.
There is something that we're going to talk about. Maybe I think we decided before we recorded just to kind of open the books with this one.
Mhm.
And when it comes to this, is something that's very near and dear to, I think, a lot of our hearts when it comes to being an experiencer of something that's unknown, supernatural, mystical, or paranormal, and talking to people about it. And that is the shame that can come with um, having these experiences and wanting, I mean, because none of us are an island. We have to connect and we have to share our experiences, or it can make us feel unhinged and crazy. And yet there's also this huge block when it comes to trying to tell people genuinely something we experience that is outside the realm of normal for them, and for us, quite frankly, too.
Mhm.
And the shame that can be attached to wanting and
Yeah.
needing to connect with others and share our stories about the paranormal.
Yeah.
And I'd be interested to know, like, to start this off with, um, from your perspective, the the origins of, or I guess maybe not the origins of, but like where the real juice and electricity that charges shame for you,
Yeah.
where that originates from, like maybe specifically
Mhm.
regarding this.
Well, it originates in myself and my story to get, just to sort of give it in a thumbnail and I guess as you pointed out before, I've talked about this in incredible detail on Euphemet, sort of my full narrative, and so I think maybe I'd refer people to that for the detailed version,
Yeah.
but the sort of 10,000-foot view is that I was a hard line skeptic of all things paranormal for throughout my life, and I'm 48 now. And when I was approximately 43, 42 or 43, I had an experience at the Stanley Hotel involving a Ouija board um, that was so undeniable that it completely rearranged my whole relationship to reality, and in a way that was both terrifying and thrilling at the same time. In retrospect, what I should explain as well is that after it happened, and I don't know that, I mean, Ryan, you guide me how much you want me to actually get into these stories, but the event happened at the Stanley Hotel, and it had a feeling of, one of the ways I like to describe it is that when I was a kid, I was very young. I remember I was walking in the park near our house, and I reached up and I grabbed a very, very thick tree branch, and it snapped off in my hand. And for a moment, I thought that I had super strength. And I was flooded with these thoughts of, oh my God, everything they told me was a fantasy is real. And wow, like what a bonus to being alive. And then I quickly realized it was a dead tree and that I didn't have super strength. But that moment when I was, 11 years old, and for a moment thought that the world was a fantastical place, is very similar to what it was like to have an undeniable encounter with what I guess I'll call the ghost for now, and I think we'll get into that later, what we call these things. But it was scary, but mostly it was incredibly thrilling. And so I walked away from that, and what seems to have happened subsequently, in another way I like to describe it, is that a cap got blown off a gasket, or a portal opened up inside my brain, and now these things won't stop happening. So I have so many stories that of undeniable, inexplicable things that have happened to me or around me in the I guess, what year is it, 2020, like the 7 years since this initial incident at the Stanley Hotel, that it's almost two, the Euphomet episode I did with Jim it was a double episode, and that was only half of the things. We couldn't get them all in. So to the point where I think the word is clairvoyant, I think. And so this is where we get at the shame, is that up until the point when I could no longer deny that these things exist, I was extremely judgmental of people who would make these kinds of claims and tell these kinds of stories. I was very snooty about it. And I believed that it was the product of a weak mind. It was people who were so desperate for these fantasies to be real to spice up their sort of, the disappointing groundedness of living, that they were buying into 99-cent store wish fulfillment to avoid the depressing reality that there's nothing out there. And of course, who doesn't want to believe that their loved ones who have passed on are still out there looking over them, and who doesn't want to believe that we're going to go somewhere when we die? Of course, these are irresistible things to believe in. I also happen to be someone who's made a career of making films on the subject. and I think it's important to note that I was already someone who was doing that for a living when this change happened to me. The interest in supernatural and paranormal didn't follow the life experience, although I do believe now that it was all related. I think I was lying to myself about it for a very, very long time. People who would tell me these stories, I was what I would be thinking in my mind was terrible. I mean, just extremely judgmental and belittling and reductive. So now when I tell these stories to other people, I frankly, that judgmental voice hasn't gone away, and it's self-judging, and it's that you're weak. This is a fantasy. You're doing exactly what all those people did that you were so critical of all of your life. You were right then. How did you become so weak now? Is it because you're getting closer to death? Are you, is that why you've become so soft, Daniel? And in addition to that, as you well know, as a fellow experiencer, and I hate that word, but and I want to talk about semantics, because I think that's another part of the shame. I think, well, I guess I'll come back to that in a minute. Um, but when I do, it took me a really long time to work up the courage to start talking about this stuff openly. And part of that is that after the Stanley Hotel incident, I had a dinner with one of my closest friends, who mercifully is far too busy to listen to any of these podcasts where I've referred to this dinner, in which I told him the story, and he became kind of angry with me, for all the reasons that I'm explaining. Like I'd become one of the weak ones to him,
Yeah, that's
and
what I was going to ask. Like, was because this was a person who was, I don't want to make assumptions here, but it sounds like maybe if it's a close friend of yours, they knew you to be an ally on this side of
yeah,
the issue, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, and it got heated. It got really uncomfortable, and I've not brought it up since. And this is this is the person who is, I frequently call my best friend. I've known him since college. We've been through everything together you can imagine, and I don't talk about this part of my life with him. It's something that eventually I need to work up the courage to do. Um, so that experience, that dinner, really humbled me and made me feel like I needed to keep this to myself. And when I started my own podcast, Visitations, which has nothing to do with the paranormal, it's just a podcast about the creative process. Um, the publicist on that booked me on Spooked, because they actually, what happened was they came to me and said, hey, we're in touch with Spooked, do you have any paranormal experiences? And I went, oh shit, like
Don't make me do it, man.
yeah, and I debated it for a long time, and in the end I decided to do it, and it, I did it, and it aired, and ironically, for whatever reason, it was the one that they pushed out for free. So it was like, I had friends in New York who were like, I just heard you on the radio, and I get so it really went out more widely than I think I was expecting it to, and that led to Jim Perry cold contacting me. And so this was the real moment of truth for me, and this is all coming back around to shame. Was so with Jim, was like, all right, he's not going to butcher it. He promised me, and I trust this guy. We've talked a lot, and am I gonna come out? And so I did. I've never posted links to any of this stuff on any of my social media, or like I'm not drawing attention to it, but little by little, um, uh, I've been sharing the Euphomet episodes with my sort of close confidants, both in my family and my friend group, and also in my professional circle. And the reactions that I get are all over the place. I have friends who are skeptics who have been very kind about it, but I wonder what they're really thinking. And then I have others who are like, my God, I've had stuff happen to me too. Others who can't get enough. Uh, but what gets real complicated is I tell stories of paranormal phenomena for a living. And what started to really, can I curse on here?
Yeah,
Yeah,
all
okay.
day long if you want.
What's really started to fuck with me. So I'm head of development for SpectraVision. We are a company known for making esoteric, supernatural films, and other things. Is that I've gotten into this place where I'll be in a story meeting, and like someone's pitching me a story, and I'll think, Sasquatches don't do that.
So this is like
Yeah,
another level, by the way.
I know.
This is another level of whether we want to call it the climb or the slide. It depends on your perspective.
I feel now. Okay, hold on. Let me back up. So, Oh, that's funny. I was just about to reference a book and I realized I think it's right next to me, or is it in the other room? That's right here. Do you know this book,
Uh,
Darkness Visible by William Styron?
I know of it because of you talking about it.
Because of me talking about it. Well, I'm
Yeah,
going to talk about it again because I think it's really important. So,
yeah.
so Styron, who wrote Sophie's Choice, he was a heavy drinker. Let's call it alcohol, like a high functioning alcoholic throughout his life. And toward the at a certain point, I don't know exactly how old he was. He quit drinking and realized that he had been self medicating uh, depression, extreme, extreme clinical depression. He ended up hospitalized, and it was a harrowing experience. And when he came out of it, he had the insight that he had been unwittingly writing about depression throughout his whole life without ever knowing that it was dormant inside of him. And so, I think the conclusion that he came to is that there is some sort of cellular awareness of these dormant conditions that somehow work their way up through the primordial goop of our unconscious and figure out ways to spike out into the material world. And that was the case with him. I think about that all the time in relation to my own narrative of how I was obsessed with paranormal stories from the time that I was a little boy. And and it took me until the experience at the Stanley Hotel to start to wrap my head around the fact that there was a reason, and that reason was that my darkness had not yet become visible. Although I prefer to call it light, um, lightness visible. Um, uh, okay, where am I going with this?
Real quick
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yes. Sorry.
before we keep going, I think just be careful. I think there's a little like a kind of a squeaky sound that'll happen when on the because of the microphone on the desk or whatever it is that you're on. Just as a heads up. But that's it. But okay, so I do like the idea of lightness becoming dark, visible,
Yeah.
almost like the lightness is coming from the darkness. Out of the lightness is like emerging from the darkness. I mean, we can talk about duality later too, if we go down that road and like how lightness for some is darkness for others. But um, okay, so you've got there just the imagery too of the primordial coming up through the primordial goop. It's like sending like flare shots, like you
Yeah.
got like a flare guns, like hey, we're down here, man. Like,
Yeah.
hey, we're down here. Because I think it's interesting to understand for a lot of people the it's that switch that gets turned off when we're kids somehow because
Mhm.
we start
Yes.
entering into the quote unquote adult world, right? And
Yeah. Yeah.
imaginary friends, all these other things are no longer shut her down,
Yeah.
and now the flare gun's going off for you. About 7 years ago, it sounds like the big flare, they're like, okay, we got one flare left, use the big one, and then boom, it sounds that's the Stanley Hotel story. It almost feels like to you.
Yes, and after it happened, I started to go back. It's like I reran the tape of my life and went, "Holy shit, man! I've had so many experiences that I somehow put in this weird category of being flukes or coincidences." And and I mean, the level of denial is absurd, right down to my grandmother at the end of her life telling me that she was clairvoyant, and my mother telling me that she was clairvoyant. And I don't know what I did with it. I just went, okay, I just locked it in a closet. And me having clairvoyant experiences, I knew who was calling often when the phone rang. I was able to read the hidden emotions of adults in ways that perplexed my parents, which I always wrote off as, well, I'm intuitive. Um, uh, on two separate occasions, I received the news that someone had died through my feelings before the news came over the phone. Um, and 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 now, one of the things that I also struggle with is my daughter, who's 12 and is a chip off the old block. She's obsessed with horror and paranormal, and has shared what seemed to me to be clairvoyant experiences. She would talk about a woman who lived in her room with her when she was barely able to talk. She would point, when I'd take her on walks, she would point at houses and talk about things that, feelings that she associated with things that had happened in the houses. She would say, she would always go, "That's the sad house."
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And then, but as you're saying, it seemed like it started to sort of burn off a little bit as she got older. And, but now she's 12 and she loves her dad and she Googles her dad and she found Spooked. And so the cat's out of the bag now, right?
Oh, so now it's kind of those. I can imagine a 12-year-old girl standing at the doorway of your bedroom, with the door open, with arms crossed, being like, "Why didn't you tell me?" Like, kind of like this whole, like, we've got something to talk about. You know what I
Kinda.
mean?
Yeah,
Yeah.
kinda. Yeah. She's so thrilled by it. It's that she's mostly just excited and wants to hear every, what else? What else?
That's
And so
great.
I played her the Queen Mary episode of Spooked as well. And then she said, are there others? And I've been, I never lie to her. So I've just been sort of deliberately evasive in my answers. I go, well, there's some stuff. I don't know if you'd like it, and I've been, but I very recently said to her, um, my grandma had it and my mom has it and it's, hereditary. You might have it too. And what I'm trying to do is normalize it for her so that it if it is something that she had. She very recently mentioned, but even before she discovered me on Spooked, she mentioned that old woman in her bedroom again. She said, yeah, I saw that woman's face near the closet, and or not, sorry, I don't think she connected it to she doesn't remember the stuff from when she was little. She said, I see a woman's face sometimes in my room. And I just go, huh, okay. And I changed the subject. And every time she brings this stuff up, I change the subject. And I realized I'm shaming her. It's like it's the same thing that people who are uncomfortable about sex with their kids, that they bring up sex and they change the subject. I'm great about that. I let her talk about sex and I answer any question she asks me point blank in ways that probably would make most people really uncomfortable. But when she brings up paranormal stuff, I shame her. I send her the signal, we don't talk about that, right? So I'm little by little, I'm trying to ease up on
That's
that.
so
And
interesting. Like, this is something I've never thought about. And I think this is like a whole nother, like, full conversation about the a sensitive raising a sensitive,
yes,
or and that's, wow, that really kind of fascinates me too. And then
me
it's
too.
like sitting down, and instead of having a birds and bees conversation, you have a
Mhm.
ghosts and grays. Okay, it's time to have that talk about the ghosts and the grays or something.
Ghosts and Grays.
Right?
Amazing. Amazing. Yeah. Well, she asked me point blank, do you believe in ghosts? And not long ago, and I said, I believe in something, but I'm hesitant to give it a name. And what I said, the analogy that I used for her is I said, do you remember Horton Hears a Who? She said, yeah, yeah. And I said, it's about, an elephant who's tasked with protecting this little town of miniature beings that live in a flower. And she was like, sure, sure. And I said, I think that's how the universe works. I think we're Who's in Whoville, and that there's smaller Who's in our flowers, but we're also on a flower, and there's some bigger being, and that's also somebody's Who. And I think it goes on forever in both directions. And so I said, I think sometimes we might have an encounter with a bigger or a smaller one, and we don't really know how to explain it, so we call it a ghost or an alien, or and honestly, I don't know that we'll ever understand it, at least while we're living in this Whoville. um, and she accepted that answer. She's still young enough that ideas that I introduced to her are, when they're kids, it's like everything's biblical. Everything's empirical. Everything's on the record. It's like there was a time when she was about 6,
Oh my
and
God! When you're a kid, everything's on the record. That's such a
yeah,
great, such a great sentiment. Like, everything is on the record when you're a kid.
yeah. I had a friend that could do this perfect impression of forgetting the name of the actor, the guy who did the voice of the Mad Hatter in Alice in Wonderland.
Oh shoot! I don't.
Um,
Yeah, I don't.
It's Paul something. He was a huge Disney actor. So we had just watched Alice in Wonderland, and just to fuck with her, I said, I know the Mad Hatter. She was like, "What do you mean?" And I had my friend ready, and I said, do you want to talk to him? And she said, "Sure." So I called my friend, and he was like, "Hello, Lucy." Okay. And he did, and she was like, "Hi, who are you?" And he's like, "It's the Mad Hatter." And they talked for a couple of minutes, and she hung up, and she was like, "Oh yeah, I guess you do know him. Anyway, let's go play with Legos." And I was like, "Wait, what does she think is happening? Like, does she think there was a cartoon character on the other end?" So this is what I mean by everything. Like it's all new, so nothing's there's nothing to reconcile at that age. It's just everything is just a priori, so I'm trying to just normalize it for her little by little, and also make sure that she doesn't get scared. So far so good.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too to consider the idea of, um, you know, the, the, I don't know, the impetus to have an action, which is, in hindsight, like you realize, like, oh, I'm shaming her. It's like, this isn't like, you're never, and it makes me think about other people too and their reactions to our stories. I would argue that, and maybe because I can be known amongst my friends of being like, really high up on the optimism spectrum, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah,
so, and a part of that is always trying to, have some devil's advocacy in my, trying to be empathetic. And
sure.
so I would argue that it's probably a very small percentage of people who want to purposefully shame us, right? Um,
Purposefully, no.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So when we, and I'm sure I've done this myself, right? So when we do things like that, that we like, then we realize like, oh, I was shaming them. It's it's not because we want to shame someone. I think it's a lack of a tool. The toolbox. We don't have the tool in the toolbox, right? As far as at least at the ready. It might be in there, but we just don't know how to identify. Are you familiar with what is a socket driver?
No.
Have you even heard of that phrase?
No.
Well, yeah, I had never heard of that phrase. I'm 44 years old. I heard that
Okay.
phrase for the first time 3 weeks ago. It's just instead of a screwdriver, it's a socket driver. And someone's like, "It's the thing you use to twist sockets." I was like, "Oh, you could have told that to me without the context of seeing it. I never would have known what it was." And little did I know I owned one of them, right? And because I
Uh-huh.
did, because he was using my socket driver, and
Yeah, that's what that's called.
yeah, so that's what that's called. So I think it's just our own lack of maybe awareness of what it is. And you talk about semantics too, and
Yeah.
you're a very thoughtful person, and so I think with that comes like we analyze the words we use,
Yeah.
the meanings attached to these words, the origins of the meanings of these words that are, it keeps going and going. And I love the English language, but or all languages. So I think it's an interesting, I don't know, it's an interesting problem to figure out. The lack of just knowing what to do can lead to the shaming, right?
Hmm.
Does that make sense? That's what I've been trying to get at. It's kind of like, not having the ability or at the ready with knowing, because I mean, as a parent, I'm not a parent, but I'm guessing as a parent, there are many things that your child will present to you, and we grow up knowing there are certain ways to handle things,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
But when it comes to your child presenting you with, there's an old woman in my closet,
Yeah.
right? This isn't a common, at least in our culture,
Right.
it isn't a common thing like, oh, so it's not in, I mean, I haven't read the books, but I'm guessing that, so you're going to be a parent. I'm guessing there's not a chapter on your
No.
kid's room is haunted. Chapter
No.
17.
There should be. There should be. Yeah, I think that people are. I think that one of the shortcomings of human beings is our violent inability to live with the unknown, and even some of the warmest and most accepting and supportive responses I've gotten from intimates in my life to whom I've told my story, it is expressed as them needing to walk away with some sort of a tidy explanation. And some of those explanations are of a paranormal nature. It's animal spirits. It's like it has to have a name. It has to have a name. It has to be in a category. Um, because, and when they ask me, I go, I don't know. And I probably never will. None of us will. We will never know the answer. Maybe when we die. But the point that I always make is, look, there are people who've dedicated their lives to piercing the veil, and they've done it through all different means. Where that can be the Buddha, it can be Timothy Leary, I have yet to hear anybody go, "Hey guys, I cracked it," So I don't think it's going to happen, and maybe there's some guy living under a bridge with a tinfoil hat who has the answers. You had a woman on your show who uses the word oracle very humbly to describe herself, who talked about how her brother is schizophrenic. And I thought, well, there it is right there, right? Like this, of course, one's called an oracle and one's called a schizophrenic. Back in the day, the schizophrenics were called oracles, right? And this is, I guess, where the semantics come in. I mean, words I think are so important. Now, I'm a writer, so of course I have that bias, but what are words but representations? And everything around us is a representation. Just the fact that it's not material doesn't mean that it isn't a representation. It has a vibration off of it. Every word has a soul. It has an identity. It has a character. It has a power to it. And you have to choose your words carefully. And I don't just think it's because if you say something wrong, people hear it the wrong way and you can't get them to unhear that or peel back their initial interpretation. I do think that's a phenomenon. But I also think words matter. I think words have specific spiritual functions in the same way that colors do and notes do and tones do. And so I do think we have to be really careful. And sometimes when I'm struggling to find the right word for something, it's not an intellectual process, it's a spiritual process. I'm going like somebody tell me the right word for this, because I don't want to say it wrong, and then it's comes up out of the primordial goop. Here's the word, the word. Or sometimes there is no word. Those are the hardest moments.
Yeah.
And those are maybe those are the ideas that people like us spend our whole life, dedicate our whole career to illuminating. One of the things I love about, I've listened to your stand-up, and one of the things I love about it is that you don't give a fuck. You just perform as though everybody's on board. You don't indoctrinate the audience. Like, let me ease you into this. I'm a believer. I've had some weird experiences. Let me orient you before we get to the jokes. I've listened to recordings of you bombing because your audience they're like, they're not experiencers, and you just keep going like you're in a convention of experiencers. And I love it, because what you're doing is you're normalizing it, and I think if you do that, if you do your show to a room of 150 people and one of them walks out going, he said stuff I've felt before, congratulations. That's almost more important than getting a laugh.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. Sometimes I wonder, like, it wasn't until like about a year ago, um, I started talking to this one particular therapist, and he does like psycho-spiritual counsel. And so he breaks down like your birth chart, your astrological signs, all this other kind of stuff into the therapy process, and really broke down like the framework of like my astrological makeup. And he said some things that I just kind of like, because I've always wondered, like, what is it inside of me that makes me be that guy, right? Instead of like, 12 years ago deciding to go a different route and, be just like sitting on stacks of cheddar right now,
Yeah.
with, and using comedy in that way. And it just really kind of had this aha moment for me. I'm like, oh, okay, that's why, it's not, I'm not a prisoner to astrology. I don't like to be a prisoner. I say,
Yeah.
like, I don't want to
Yeah.
be a prisoner to my chart. Um, but it was interesting where he like described like, well, this is who you are, blah, 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 blah. And this is why you don't give a shit about that. And I was like, oh my God, it's been there the whole time. And I didn't
Yeah.
realize it. But
Yeah. Yeah.
it is, I think, important for me, like the normalization aspect.
Yeah.
because it wasn't easy for me to like initially start doing that. I mean, I had my initial experience, and then it took me years before I even mentioned it on stage, even
And that
casually.
was with your girlfriend? Is that
Yeah,
was it? Yeah.
with the ex-girlfriend who could shapeshift.
Hmm.
And I think the first time I ever even really talked about it, oh my gosh, and it was just yesterday with the anniversary of 9/11. And I think it was the 10-year anniversary of 9/11 in 2011. I was working with two other comedians, Tom Simmons and Billy Wayne Davis, and we were doing a weekend run of a show we called Kooks. And we wrote it in the hotel room that weekend. And it was a conspiracy theory based comedy show. And the first night was anarchy. I mean, we had people standing up in the audience screaming at us and yelling at us. And then we had people in the audience standing up and yelling at them. And so then,
Wow.
like, after this was in Atlanta at a place called the Laughing Skull. And uh, the next night, they started giving a warning at the door. Like, okay, this is you, we need to warn you about this comedy show, blah blah blah. And so we didn't really have any other disruptions after that, which was a little unfortunate, I thought.
Yeah.
But like it was the first time like people came to a comedy club, they weren't expecting to hear jokes about 9/11 being an inside job, right?
Right.
Or all this other stuff. And slowly but surely the normalization is coming, and with that comes all the other stuff attached to it. But when it comes to the normalization, I think I always love examining micro and macro.
Mm.
And it's one thing to have like these things normalized, you know, in the media and in entertainment and things like that. And I mean, entertainment is bonkers right now. When it seems like every new show on television has aliens or time travel or
I know.
multiple dimensions, things like that. So we're here, we're there, right? The government is finally acknowledged UFOs in an official capacity. Something big is happening, and I think it ties into 7 years ago, your awakening. I'm not saying you triggered this whole thing for the world, uh,
It was absolutely me.
but there's this book, The Trickster and the Paranormal,
Yeah.
written by George B. Hansen, and I got to a part in it just the other day where he's talking about, you know, paranormal events and more people experiencing paranormal events when a great societal change is happening.
Interesting.
And so, you know, if you go back 8 years, when, you know, Obama's second term, things like this. And so, like, change is after Obama gets elected for his second term, there's now light at the end of the tunnel for people who don't want progress anymore, right? To keep moving forward because they know his term, now he's going to have an end, right? And so now the shot has now presented itself for 4 years later to retake that position, right?
Hmm.
At least as a figurehead kind of thing. And I'm not trying to make all this political, but more and more people start. I think the last 7 years have been an explosion of paranormal awakenings. The world of woo has exploded, and I think you couldn't contain it anymore. It would not. It refused to be contained inside of you anymore, right?
That's interesting. That's interesting.
And like right at the beginning that I would, you know, because everything starts a little bit earlier than we thought it did, right?
Yeah.
And so like this whole Trump thing, this didn't start 4 years ago when he got elected, right? This has been a long time coming, but it is interesting the correlations between your life and the changes that are now happening in society and the turmoil that's happening in the explosion of paranormal activity. But the original point before I got distracted was by my own words was the normalization, right? And micro and macro. We can normalize these things in media and entertainment, right? But first and foremost, the normalization has to come within ourselves, right?
Right. Right. I like to call it paranormalization.
Oh my God, that's
Yeah.
great. Oh,
I need
I
to
mean,
I
I
need
could
to
geek
trade
out
I
with
need to trademark
you.
that.
Do you do? I mean, that's the name of your podcast. I
Yeah, I
think.
know.
Um, I mean, I could geek out with you all day long about words
Huh.
and letters and language because it's a living thing. I'm so on board with that,
Yeah.
growing and changing. But I'm curious about like the techniques maybe or the journey you've had in doing that micro personal internal normalization when it comes to your own experiences, which eventually then leads to sharing with friends, right? Or maybe that's part of the process.
Hmm. It's a good question. Well, I think it would, I think, my awareness of this being something that was here to stay and not a one-off after the Stanley Hotel was sort of gradual. Um, the second thing that happened was at the Queen Mary, and then the, I think part of the inner struggle, which I've already talked about, is that there's still, even as I sit here talking to you right now, there's a voice in my head saying, uh, yeah, right. It's keep dreaming, kid. None of it. This is all bullshit.
I don't
And
know if
just
that ever
one,
goes away, by the way.
I
I
don't
still have
think
that
it
voice. I
does.
still have that
Yeah,
voice. And
yeah,
I mean, intellectually, I'm like, there's no way this voice should still be around considering what I've
I
seen and
know.
experienced. But it's there. And I just have to accept it. And
Well,
that's,
it's
yeah.
it's like I have a shockingly high number of my male gay friends were raised Catholic. I don't know what the hell that's about, but they all say, every one of them says, every time I engage in a sex act, I hear a voice in the back of my head telling me that I'm going to hell, and I believe it on some level. Like, it never stops, so yeah, I don't think we're ever, that shaming that's built into it, it's hammered into us. One of the things I find really interesting about all this is the relationship between organized religion and the paranormal, and how in some ways you'll find the most open acceptance of elements of the phenomenon in Catholicism, right? Like the Vatican is down with exorcism as a risk. So it's like, whoa, okay, you guys, so you believe in angels and demons, but you don't believe in aliens. Like, I think you got to kind of, it's like all or nothing here. I don't think you get to pick and choose. And I have I have a very good friend in my life who is a born again Christian, who's a Catholic. And when I first met him, I was super, we're never going to get along, but it turns out we see the world in a very similar way. I've never told him about my stuff. I've just, when he asks me about my belief system, I sort of cryptically respond, we're a lot more aligned than you might think. And I don't go beyond that, you know? Um, but where am I going with this? It is hilarious to me that Catholics will accept angels and demons, but that's where they draw the line, you know.
Yeah.
Um, I wanted to I keep this quote. I keep quotes like on my notes app on my phone that are important to me, that sometimes I need to just revisit to ground myself. And I wanted to read this quote from Operation Trojan Horse by John Keel. Your brain is a very sophisticated, little understood receiver, and it is tuned to wavelengths far beyond the receiving capabilities of manufactured electronic instruments. Most people are running around with crude biological crystal sets in their heads and are not consciously receiving any of the sophisticated signals. However, about 1/3 of the world's population possesses a more finely tuned instrument. These people experience telepathy, prophetic dreams, and other bizarre signals from some central source. If you are one of that 30%, you know precisely what I mean. If you belong to the larger, ungifted 2/3, you probably regard all of this as nonsense, and we may never be able to convince you otherwise.
Wow. And it's funny to me, the 1/3, how many of the people in the 1/3 at one time or another would have aligned themselves in the 2/3 without
Yes,
realizing it, maybe.
like me.
And
Yeah,
like you,
yeah,
exactly. And I think,
yeah.
I mean, that strikes me from an outsider's perspective. Um, maybe why you keep that quote around, like as a reminder
I
too,
think
right?
so. Well,
Because I
and
think,
also,
yeah.
sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Well, it's also, I think, to remind myself not to be lonely. And because here's the thing, 1/3 is huge. I mean, think about that. So how many look, who listens to your show? The people predisposed to, right? But if there was some bizarre other world reality where we could force feed an episode of your show to everyone in the world, theoretically 1/3 of them would go, yeah, I get it, right?
Yeah.
That's a lot. That's
That's
a
2 point,
lot.
what is that,
Yeah.
2.4 billion people or whatever it is?
I don't ask me math, but yeah, but I, this all gets at like why I think it's so what I said early on, like why I say yes whenever I'm asked to do one of these podcasts is like, I think Jim told me something interesting. Oh, and right, this gets at the other element of shame that I wanted to mention is that when Jim refers to me as an experiencer or a sensitive and I always kind of wince a little bit, because I think the other little voice of shame, there are two. They're two different guys. One of them is you're weak for believing in all this, and the other one is you're just looking for attention.
Ah,
Do you have that guy?
yes, that guy has. That was the guy that was like, that guy's been in my head since I wanted to be a priest when I was 7 years old. Like, when I called the altar a stage,
Yeah.
I was like, I want to be a priest up on stage. And it's like, that guy's like, yeah, you're going to get the attention, because that's the most captive audience in the world, is one who thinks
Yeah.
their soul, the eternal fate of their soul, rests on listening to you. I mean, if every comedy club audience was as that captive, I mean, get out of
Right.
it.
Right.
But
Right.
no, yeah, I've had that voice.
Yeah. So when it's I want, oh sorry, this was getting back to, is that, so my business partner is Elijah Wood, and I'm just some schmuck. He's an internationally beloved celebrity, and he was with me at the Stanley Hotel when all this happened. So I don't usually talk about him, because it's his life and his decision what he wants to talk about. He is not a sensitive, although he's wildly open and accepting of, he can't get enough of my stories about this. He loves it, even though he was there when we all had the experience at the Stanley, but I don't know that he felt it. He observed the stuff that you can see, there were things that you could see and hear. I don't know that he had the cellular response that I had in that room, and maybe others had too. But what Jim told me was that when that story came out, because there were two journalists present who wrote about it, one in the Daily Beast and one at a website called Birth Movies Death. And what Jim told me later, after we'd become friends, was that the fact that there was a report of an event that involved a celebrity who didn't deny it was apparently something very meaningful to the community of experiencers, and that was a really interesting thing for me to hear. And so while I'm not a celebrity, I'm in the movie business, and like you already were established in entertainment before your first experience, right? So I assume there was a moment for you too where you're like, am I gonna talk about this? Like this changes the way that I'm viewed in the professional landscape, right? And maybe in some ways for the worse, in some ways for the better. But insofar as I think, like you, or like anyone who is established professionally, you do have something to lose by being open about this stuff. And there are people who will think you're a kook, kooks, right? Who will write you off. And so that is a big part of why, despite my aversion to anything that smacks of attention seeking, I force myself to, when Jim introduced us, it didn't, believe it or not, didn't even occur to me that you would ask me to do your show. I just wanted to meet you because I was just super interested in your experiences, and thought maybe we would hang out sometime, right? And then you were like, do you want to do the show? And I was like, of course. Of course he's going to ask me that. That's what, and so, the answer is yes, because paranormalization, like the more, it's like you doing your stand-up show, and if one person walks out going, holy shit, I'm not alone, right? Which is what I believe is the function of art to begin with. And this is what I think draws it all back together, is that, when my company Spectre Vision makes very strange, esoteric films, you call them horror. We've never made a scary movie. We make movies that are about honestly interdimensional occurrences, and which is a whole other topic, was something I also only realized recently. I was like, oh my god, I'm head of development at a company. Every movie I've like taken the lead on developing is something about piercing the veil between realities. I didn't even realize it. I didn't even realize it. We've never done a slasher movie. We've Mandy's about other worlds. Color Out of Space is literally about ultra dimensional invasion. Daniel Isn't Real is about an ultra dimensional character. The film we're about to release is about an ultra dimensional character. All unconscious, right? All unconscious. So, but anyway, I remember when after Mandy came out, that movie, was touched a lot of people. But I was at a film festival and this young woman came up to me and said, I just wanted to tell you, I've been waiting for this movie all my life. And I said, why? And she said, I didn't know anyone else felt the way I feel until I saw this movie. And I don't know that I've ever received any feedback on anything I've worked on that has meant more to me than I'm actually emotional just recounting that story, because I believe this is the function of art, and it's why artists exist. Is I teach, and one of the things I tell my students is we all start out as mimics, right? Like I bet you started out mimicking one of your favorite comics.
I was going to be Richard Lewis meets Robin Williams.
There you go.
That was
You
my goal.
probably
Like, I'm going to be a neurotic improvisational beast on stage.
did you mimic their verbal cadences and their, like, did you at
Yeah, a
the
little
beginning?
bit. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, a
yeah,
little bit.
right.
Yeah, for sure.
We all do, right? That's how we all start as artists. We mimic the people that touched us. But where the kind of graduation that the artist has is the realization that, yes, mimicry is the thing, but the thing you're supposed to be mimicking is your inner life. Getting back at representation, that a work of art, whether it's a charcoal drawing or a symphony or a poem or a joke or a motion picture, is a representation of a subjective experience that cannot be expressed through traditional means. And so the greatest artists are those who can shut out all external input and truly observe what's happening in the primordial goop and represent it with something external. And the reason to do that is that there are others out there who have that same experience, who think they're alone. And when they encountered the representation of the thing that they thought was just them, you've made the world a slightly better place, right? This extends, I believe, to talking out loud about our experiences as experiencers. And that it's, if there are others out there, who are like, holy shit, there's a comedian who's willing to talk about this, or a film producer who's willing to talk about this, that, then hopefully they'll be a little less ashamed. And little by little, we can chip away at the shaming that goes on. That even I, as a person who am trying to be very outspoken about this stuff, I've realized that I was shaming my daughter by sending her a signal, we don't talk about this. So I can't remember what question you asked me that got me here, but oh yeah, it was about the embarrassment about attention seeking.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it
I'm
is
still just kind of sitting here like in awe of the beautiful description of, like, whether we want to call it the purpose or the destiny of art and making art
yeah.
that you described. It's fucking beautiful the way you described that. And oh, I just loved it. But yeah, so
Thank
okay,
you.
so like you got that voice in your head saying you're seeking attention, right?
Yeah,
And so that's what got us here. But I think you're right about, like, so much of this, that it's like, I've always thought that it's such a rudimentary toolbox that we have to be able to try to describe our deepest thoughts, feelings, and emotions,
so rudimentary.
right? And a gut buster joke, in my opinion, one of the, there's many perfect jokes, because it's all so subjective to the person hearing it, is when you are able to articulate something that another person has already thought,
Yeah,
but or felt, and just wasn't able to say.
yeah,
And that's a gut buster. That's when that like Like they can't help it.
Absolutely.
They can't help it.
Absolutely. Yeah. But I would say there's two levels to that. And one is that it's something they weren't able to say because they didn't have the courage. And the other is it's something they weren't able to say to themselves. And I think those are the ones where the gut actually, the, the
Oh, that's
alien actually
interesting.
bursts out of the chest,
Yeah.
is, like, oh, oh, oh,
Yeah. Like that triple O.
that's, yeah,
Oh.
yeah, yeah. That's not just like I've always wanted to go off at the guy that is too slow in front of me at the grocery uh, versus I never realized until right this moment that I'm gay or I'm but whatever it is, like those are the real powerhouse
Yeah,
works
for
of
sure.
art, gut busters.
I I love the idea too that just simply talking about it out loud, right,
Yeah,
is part of the normalization process and
yeah,
chipping away at the shame.
yeah.
And it is, I mean, I guess sometimes it can be as simple as, hey, just having the conversation, right? And 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 people realize like, oh, we can talk about this. And
Hmm.
in that conversation can just it can trigger another conversation. Oh, I heard people talking about has that ever happened to you? Because I do have a theory that almost everyone, if they if I sat down with them and was given enough time to talk to them,
Hmm.
we could get to at least one
I think you're right.
experience. They're like, you know
Hmm.
what? I've never
Hmm.
experienced anything because I've heard that so many times.
Yeah.
I've never had any experiences. And then half an hour later, that one time there was this really weird thing that happened, and they
Yeah.
described seeing a ghost, and it's like, what?
Yeah, yeah. Well, there was a time I went whitewater rafting with 14 aliens for 2 weeks. It was just us.
Yeah,
And then they took me to another dimension, and I saw a Sasquatch there, and then I was reborn. And yeah, I forgot about
yeah. But who knows? I mean, that could have been anything.
that. Yeah. Amazing.
I do think. I mean, we've been talking for about an hour now, and I love the idea that most of this has been at least launched from the idea of the shame that can be attached to paranormal experiences. And I'm with you on on so much. Like, I've got the voices in my head that will tell me, like, I've had there's this great documentary called Under the Dome, and it's about flat earthers. And it's a well done doc. And it doesn't try to shame the flat earthers, but it tries to show some empathy in the approach.
Hmm. Hmm.
And one of the questions asked to one of the most prominent flat earthers was, okay, if you yourself firsthand had evidence that the earth was round, would you be able to leave all of this position of status you have in the community, the
Wow.
money that you're making as the flat earth, as one of the faces of flat earth? Would you be able to leave it all behind and say, you know what, I realize the earth is round? And in one of these brilliant moments caught on camera, you have someone who wasn't afraid to be honest. And if I'm getting this correctly, it's been a couple of years since I've seen it. His answer was, you know, I don't know.
Hmm. Wow.
And
Even that. I mean, the answer should be yes.
right, but
Right?
like
Yeah. Yeah.
his honesty and like, he was kind of set up for, like, would you be
Yeah.
willing to lose all your money and lose your
Right.
notoriety and your friends, and he's like, I don't know that, he's like, I don't think he'd considered it,
Interesting.
right? And so when it comes to, like, whether it's the skeptical person that can be living inside of our brain, versus the true believer that's inside of our brain, right? In like the battle that they can wage with one another,
Hmm.
it's an interesting thing. I do have that conversation in my own mind, like, would I be able to accept that I was mentally ill this whole time and all of this was a fucking dream,
Sure. Yeah.
right?
I've had it too.
Yeah. And then I can't let myself go down that road too far, because then it's like an exercise in futility, I think, really. And just driving ourselves, almost trying to drive ourselves crazy for some effect,
I think
in
we
our
will
mind.
have those moments. And something you've been talking about on your show lately that I really resonates with me because it's a thought I've been having too. And I don't know if it's just in the air or what is it, or that we're just in similar points in our own development in relationship to this stuff, but is the idea that we have to stop looking at traditional science. It's not the right tool. So of course it's never, why is there no photograph of a Sasquatch? Because the camera is not the tool. It's not like, and that's one of the things I talked about with Jim on Euphomet is this idea that, and I want to repeat it because I think it's important, that traditional science is based on proving assumptions one by one. So you take an assumption, you put it into a controlled setting, and you test it. And if you can prove the first assumption, that is permission to move on to the second one that follows. It's a chain of assumptions, and eventually you prove, oh, the Earth is flat, or the Earth is round, or whatever. But the problem with the phenomenon, as we call it, is that it doesn't pass those tests. So we never get past assumption one in terms. So what I find interesting is this idea of rather than putting each assumption to the test where we have to leave it saying yes or no, and it's always going to be no, is to go, fuck that part. I'm going to say yes to everything. Because if the truth is at the top of the stairs, and the only way I'm going to get there is by saying yes to every stair, right? And then when I get there, I might look down and see with absolute clarity the things that science can't see from the bottom of the stairs. But I'm never going to get to the top if science is the vehicle, right? So I think you're dead on with that. And it's one of the reasons, that Bigfoot Collectors Club, where at the end they go, is it like believe or bullshit? That thing they do where they list like 15 Loch Ness Monster, alien, and each guest has to say believe or bullshit. I hate that because it's not that simple, right? Like the flat, I don't believe the Earth is flat, but I don't fucking know. Maybe it is to those people, and there is no spoon. How can we say with I don't believe it. Getting back to representation, I think I have come to believe none of this is real. It is right now, but if someone's gonna, do you believe in the Loch Ness Monster? Do you believe? I mean, the answer is, to me, I don't even need to hear the list. The answer is yes to every item, because I believe those people had those experiences. I can't explain why. I don't know how, but I know that, and this is getting around to something that you said you wanted to talk about before we started recording, about this idea that the phenomenon may present itself in ways that are particular to the individual based on their own biases and belief systems and histories and personal histories. Sorry. And in my case, I've had a series of ghost story experiences that are so unbelievably riddled with literary cliches that I'm embarrassed. I mean, I tell these stories and I'm like, the little girl that like something knocked hard on my door 3 times. And, it's, I got lost in a labyrinth, and and when I turned back, I couldn't find my way back. These are tropes, right? And I found myself going like, okay, why is every single thing that happens to me in the vernacular of a ghost story, but there's a woman across the street for whom every single thing that happens is in the vernacular of an alien encounter, and then there's a person over there on that farm for whom every experience is in the vernacular of a Sasquatch story, and then and I don't even know about what's going on in Ireland. They're seeing banshees over there, right? How do you explain that? And the only logical explanation I can come up with is that the whatever is going on outside of Whoville, it either shapes itself in a way that each individual can handle, or it's this big amorphous blob of something we can't process with our pea brain. So our brain filters it through the language of things we know. I'm a guy who has been obsessed with ghost stories all of my life on a literary level, right? I've read every, Turn of the Screw, The Haunting of Hill House, I've read, my bookshelf is filled with classic ghost stories from literature. And then lo and behold, when I start having experiences, big shocker, it seems like it's pulling from the card file in my brain. But if I, and I've had, I've become obsessed with Sasquatches, and your Sasquatch story I have to tell you, like, I don't know, maybe this is a conversation for a different podcast. It had an impact on me that it actually felt beyond what it should. Like I told Jim, I was like, I, I, there was a point at which I realized that I had listened to your Sasquatch story like 3 times. Like I kept going back to it over and over, and I was like haunted by it. And where am I going with this? I I want Sasquatch, and I'm like, why do they keep giving me ghosts? Can I get a Sasquatch, please?
Well, someday maybe we'll have to go to Florida, and I
I
mean,
want to, and I don't want to at the
or up
same.
to Willow Creek even. I mean, that's a much closer
Yeah,
trip from Los Angeles once I'm back in the area. I mean, that making that trip and um, you know, Bobcat Goldthwait's film Willow Creek,
I still haven't watched it. Yeah.
the found footage, framed as that, but it's because he's a
He's a
Bigfoot.
believer, right?
Oh yeah, he's a Bigfoot
Yeah,
guy,
yeah,
and it is interesting because like when you describe like when you were having that conversation with Jim, I describe it as like almost like a new nodule pops out in my brain is what it feels like when like a new idea comes in and really takes hold. It's like
yeah.
boink, and it's like, oh shit, now I'm thinking in a whole different way. The idea that the phenomena will, and I think with any highly intelligent thing potentially, um, some who's a good communicator, right? Amongst people, someone who knows how to talk to people, right? That's what we say.
Mm.
So if someone is very good at communication, the most effective way to communicate is in a way, and I taught for a very short period of time many years ago in a grade school, and it was like, how do you reach these kids? And all of them were different. So something that's very adaptive, and maybe we could consider it higher intelligence, will know the best way to
Right.
communicate
Yeah,
with everybody.
yeah.
And I'd never considered that before
Hmm.
in regards to the phenomena having that mode of intelligence or like that function. And it was just like, oh duh, right? I was like, this makes sense to me
Yeah.
in a major, in a like a deep way.
Well,
um,
I have to thank you. I have to say that it's the idea came to me from Keel and Jacques Vallée. I mean, that's
yeah,
but I mean, I don't know that they got so fine with it as to say that it would be crafted to the individual, but for certainly with Operation Trojan Horse, the whole premise is that the phenomenon presents itself based on what's happening culturally at the time. So, when he tracks all of the recordings of UFO encounters, they do follow patterns. They're airships for a period of time, and then they're
hmm
flying saucers for a period of time, and then it seems like the phenomenon was presenting itself at least globally by what was happening in the culture. So it would follow then I don't know what it wants or why it does what it does, but why wouldn't it tailor its representation to the individual too?
yeah, it's a fascinating exercise to just sit and contemplate. And
Yeah.
it was, I mean, I was up until probably 4 a.m. last night, just kind
Oh.
of like thinking like, and I was like, oh, I'm kind of, my dad and stepmom aren't at their house, so I'm here by myself for like a couple more days, and I'm just like, maybe I shouldn't be like lights out going into this right now, like these mind exercises that I'll go on, because I just got back recently to being able to be like totally cool in total darkness, um, but I'm like, okay, I can do it. We'll see. I know myself well enough now, I think, but it's the possibilities, the endless possibilities of all this, and the unknowingness that is attached to all of these possibilities
Yeah.
is maddening yet exhilarating. And
Mhm.
I think, because you were talking about it earlier, but it's this human nature that we have to categorize, right?
Yeah.
Going back to the very beginning, and I need to be able to categorize this experience you're telling me about. I need to know how to frame it in my own mind. Where can I file this away, right?
Yeah.
Does it go into my bullshit cabinet or my,
Right.
hey, this is legit cabinet?
Yeah.
um, and that's what I love about the thing you said about the children, like
Yeah.
everything's on the record.
Yeah.
They've got one file cabinet.
Yeah. Yeah.
and and I think once we get back into allowing our curiosity to play a bigger part and have like more of a childliness
Mhm.
about the universe around us and being more playful, we start to merge those files back into one cabinet
Mhm.
and realize that separating them doesn't really serve us a purpose. Uh,
Yeah.
I mean, there is the survival aspect, the biochemical, and I got friends who are like into neuroscience and all that kind of shit. I get it. I
Yeah.
understand like survival and all this stuff, right? But I don't think for our consciousness in this playground of invisibility that we have thoughts running around swinging and going through tubes, like what the fuck, it doesn't make any sense why it's like just thinking like no one's really explained consciousness, right? So it's like
Right.
we don't need these two file cabinets in the office of consciousness. um and I think that's the beautiful thing too about being able to funnel all this stuff into creative lives. And
Mhm.
and we're gonna put a bow on this because we'll have to do another chat. And especially once I'm back in California and things are opened up and people can be around each other. But I think it'd be really fun to sit
I'd
down and
love to.
um but I would like you to maybe just put a bow on like personally what it means for you to be coming into this phase of your life and really doing the full embrace on the weirdo that is you, right? If we want to, say it lovingly in that kind of way.
Mm. Hmm. This might be a disappointing answer, but I don't think I know yet. This is, I'm 7 years in, but I feel like I'm just at the beginning of processing all of this. And I think the most that I can say, and I hope this doesn't come off as some sort of a messiah complex, but is that is sort of what I was getting at earlier, and that I believe the role of the artist is to represent things that can't be expressed through traditional means. And the realization that the things that I've been representing in the films that I've been making have aligned very closely with the beliefs that I've developed after I made those films, right? Is that perhaps the truth that I've been, playing a part in representing in the films that Spectre Vision makes, um, is for a reason. Is that maybe they're that, and look, this gets at a whole. I hope maybe we can save this for our next conversation. But just the role of fiction sometimes leading the way, and it's particularly sci-fi and supernatural fiction, perhaps being willing to deal with things that might have more authenticity to them than we would care to admit.
Oh my God, this is
So
like, oh God, you're blasting me open right now. I'll hold. I'll hold.
so and this is what gets back to what I said about I there was this my favorite example of this is, like, I heard this gorgeous pitch about a Sasquatch movie, but in the back of my mind I was like, yeah, but they have telepathy. This didn't get into telepathy. I can't get behind this. And I, my poor partners, and the people, the people who work with us in development, like, they've gotten used to we get a project in, and they're all like, they know that they're all talking about how they love it, and they can just see my face, and they're like, here it comes, and I go, yeah, sorry, but this isn't how that works. I can't, I can't be a part of this. It's a misrepresentation of the way that I believe this to work. And it's kooky, man. But yeah, I mean, I think there's a reason that these crazy sci-fi horror stories resonate the way that they do. I think they come from something true.
Yeah, and macro micro, the flare gun we talked about and coming up from the primordial goop, right?
Yeah.
It's, as you were saying that, it hits me that like, oh, fiction in these movies, and this I think is a whole another conversation that we can have, is if we look at it from a micro level, like our consciousness, right, and from our subconscious, what about global consciousness and the global subconscious, like shooting off those flare guns, like, hey, this is real, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so it's finding its way out in ways that we can in modern times, especially in the West, and I think everywhere now. I mean, with the smartphones and
Hmm.
everything in entertainment everywhere, it's like, how can these people understand this?
Hmm.
And how can I get this or how can I get this
Hmm.
message out through
Hmm.
the primordial goop
Hmm.
and to make them see it?
Hmm.
And storytelling is, I mean, I'm obviously biased, but storytelling and performance is always the best way.
Hmm.
Um,
I think so
and
too.
yeah, and I
Because
think
people
there's
feel
a,
safe. They feel
yeah,
safe with it because they think it's play.
yeah, and it's always been, the ghost story has always been one of the most, if not the most effective vehicle for storytelling in many
Hmm.
ways. And I just discovered George Saunders not that long ago, and I can't believe I'd never read any of his stuff. And
Hmm.
a lot of people would consider him to be like one of the greatest living American authors right now. And so many of his stories have an aspect of the supernatural. And I'm like, oh, this is no coincidence, right? These are like the quintessential ways to tell like morality tales or any. I mean, the Bible is a once supernatural,
Totally.
tome. It's like, yeah. So,
Yeah.
well, this has been rad, man. This has been really cool. And I want to
Likewise.
remind people to check out Euphemet with Jim Perry. The two episodes. Is it
I think
in
they're
the
called the glow. I think.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's if you just go on to Spotify or wherever you listen to podcasts and you search Euphemet and Daniel Noah, you'll find it. You're going to find these episodes, and I'm going to tell you what, they're riveting, they're really enjoyable, and and they're entertaining. You got a great way of telling a story. It's no surprise that you're in the storytelling business. Um, and so, and for people curious, check out SpectraVision. Just check out their catalog. I mean, just go dive deep into it, and get some good storytelling in your life. Is there anything else you want to like put out there, like the podcast and or any like Instagram or any of that stuff?
No, no. Thank
Okay,
you. Yeah.
dude, this has been a ton of fun. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
jumping on. Look forward to part two
Me
or the
too.
continuation at some point soon. And yeah, and thanks again.
Thank you, Ryan. Okay.